The other thing I want to touch on is ergonomics. Um, most of us aren't necessarily holding our laptops or iMacs or whatever they may be, but we hold our phones. And how and where we hold our phones has another really great impact. So with this little graphic, you can kind of see what the sort of natural arc of a phone being held in the left hand that your thumb can easily reach without having to reposition the phone. We've all done it. But every time I go to stop, reposition my phone to go touch something, there's a little bit of a cost. There's a little psychological cost saying, oh, I got to do this. There's a physical cost of I'm now having to move my muscles to move my finger over up to go do something. Sometimes that may not be a bad thing. If you look subtly, a lot of times, sort of destructive actions, deletes and those sorts of things, or anything sort of open up what you consider a destructive action, are actually outside that sort of natural thumb range. So there is sort of a moment of pause, an explicit effort to go touch something. We need to think about how they're going to touch it. So here is a standard portrait mode. Some sort of utility type app would be in this probably design. I'm probably using one thumb. But if I'm doing a game, like I said earlier, it's probably a landscape, and I'm probably double thumbing. If I'm using a tablet device, how am I holding that? Am I cradling it and using my pointer and just touching around there? Or am I holding along the side, browsing around, and I want my controls to basically run along the verticals of the right and left-hand side of the screen? Good example of how this sort of has played out is if you go back and find some old screenshots of, say, Android 1.6, that version of the OS. The tabs, the default tab location on the Android OS was across the top. And for iOS, as long as I can remember it, they've always been along the bottom with that design pattern. And if you look later, after a few iterations of the OS, the tabs have floated to the bottom. Now, some were saying, oh, they're copying Apple. Actually, no. What they found was this sort of thumb reach, those tabs needed to come down. Android put them up at the top to make it easy because upper left starts at 0, 0. Real easy to figure out how the tabs run across your screen. But reality is the ergonomics. Start to think about how you play and move in the design. But now we need to talk about the other element as we get into this development world, and that is screen resolution. Screen is an interesting problem. If you've done desktop apps, you probably have built, designs, websites, that will adapt to different screens. You resize the browser, the stuff resizes. We actually don't get to resize on mobile devices, but our apps must resize to different screens. So what we have is a whole variety of screen sizes. The original iPhone or small HTC, might be 480, 320. More likely for an Android phone, you're looking at the 800, 400 point. The iPhone 4, 4S is 960 by 640. iPad is 1024, 768. Naturally, are getting bigger. That seems to be the trend. But there's another interesting problem here we got to touch on. It's its pixels per inch. So the very interesting problem is, let's look at the first two there. So the Nexus 1 and the HTC Incredible has a resolution of 800 by 480 pixels. And it has a PPI, pixels per inch, of 254. And a physical size of 3.7 inches. Well, HTC Evo, same company, same resolution, has a physical size of 4.3.
Sorry.
So if you look at it,
Sorry, Chris. I think there's someone with their mic open. Could everyone check that they're...
there we go. No problem. So you see there is almost a 40 PPI difference between the two. What does that mean? So if you came from the print world, you're probably used to dots per inch, DPI. Well, in the mobile world, PPI becomes one of your most critical things. So what this means, you look through this whole table. In fact, I actually have this printed out and stuff on my whiteboard in my day job, is 50 pixels is going to be physically different from device to device to device. I mean, look at the Galaxy Tab. It's 1.7, 170 ppi. So the size here, that's going to be very different than, say, the high resolution of putting a 50 pixel graphic on an iPhone 4 and iPhone 4S. What it boils down to is how physically big is the target that the user can touch. So that 44 pixels I mentioned earlier is kind of a misnomer. It's really what about 44 pixels equates to on, say, an iOS device, which I think is about 3/16 of an inch. I could be wrong. You'll have to look that up. But those types of things are the challenges that you can have. Now, what I have found, independent of my publishing technology, one of the things I really do like about the Air solution is I can quickly just bring in a static graphic into a flash file, publish it out to either an iOS or an Android device relatively easy, and get a sense of how it's going to look, and make a lot of design course corrections before we even get into code. So that's just a little bit of sales pitch. So that's some of the foundation stuff of mobile. I find without setting some of this level set of the whys and some of the things around it, understanding Adobe Air for mobile gets out of context. So with that, let's shift gears and talk about Adobe Air.